please.
Okay, I will start with some Hebrew words for our local audience, then I'll switch back to English. אז ברוכים הבאים לכולם, שמחים שהצטרפתם אלינו לקבוצה ולהרצאה הערב. חשוב מאוד שאם אתם מגיעים לקבוצה, אתם חדשים, אז שתוכלו להצטרף לקבוצה, הקבוצה שלנו, שבה אנחנו מנהלים דיונים גם בכתוב, אבל בעיקר בצ'אט הקולי, בנושאים שמשפיעים ונוגעים בכל אספקט של חיינו, בנושא של חופש, מוסר אובייקטיבי, פילוסופיה וכלכלה. במהלך הערב אנחנו נארח את Ivor Cummins. בהמשך להרצאה יהיה זמן לשאלות, תשובות ודיון פתוח. So now I'll switch to English, and thanks everybody for joining us with this lovely evening, hosting Ivor Cummins, the one and only. I've been following Ivor for a very long time, when bad science was just about fat hypothesis, cholesterol, and stuff like that. Since then, we discovered a couple more things, and we are stoked to have you here. We welcome you, and the stage is yours.
Hey, thanks a lot, Pablo, and it's great to be here for sure. And I'll just go now and share again, which hopefully will work again. You see, we'll get into the slides. Okay. In one moment. Yeah. So I actually, just a brief background, I'm a biochemical engineer, and I spent around 25 years in complex problem solving, corporate sphere, medical device and high volume manufacture, electronics, fluidics. And it set me up very well around 10 years ago when I got some poor blood tests. And I'll tell that story briefly. I think it tells people a lot about the way the system works. So around 10 years ago, I got much more into metabolic health and biochem and back to my roots. And I've traveled all over the world, speaking east, west coast, Estonia, Israel, of course, and the UK, Ireland, and all over the place, really. And here I actually did get in 2018 into the British Association for Cardiovascular Prevention and Rehabilitation. There's their president, Scott Murray, to give a keynote on insulin resistance and heart disease. So I don't think they'd have me now after covering COVID for the last few years, but I got in there, and I got into the Irish Cardiology Association to debate professors on nutrition and health. So, but those doors, I guess, are closed now because I'm a little more controversial. And I mentioned, I was in Israel at the Metabolics conference in 2019. Fantastic. Wife came over. We stayed in Tel Aviv. And it was an amazing experience. So love the people, love the country. It was just fantastic. And I was a little more tanned and slim back then. So the lockdown put some weight on. But anyway, so today I was going to go through all the kind of health stuff and controversies in health. But a couple of the guys were saying earlier, maybe it's better to get into why the whole world has gone crazy and not just focus on nutrition. So I did a compromise. And I'll just show this here from 2019. It's probably at my peak. Dr. Peter Bagshaw is an excellent doctor in the UK. And this is not for self-edification. But the reality is I've been putting out content that explains chronic disease prevention that kind of does make a joke of the orthodox advice. So as he said there, he learned more in 20 minutes in this talk I gave than he's really picked up in 40 years of medicine in the National Health Service. So there's a lot there, but once you crack it and you have a huge network, I have an enormous network of doctors, professors in metabolism and medicine around the world for the last 10 years. So the beauty is, like with COVID, when I added immunologists and other experts in virology, you don't just trust yourself in terms of your research. You make sure you get a network. And that's what I did my whole career. I had a network of content experts. So I might be the master problem solver leading the whole effort, but I always grilled the content experts to verify I was not missing something. And I think that's important in these days of misinformation, accusations. You know, you have to use all of the real published data and the real experts. You can't just go off on a Facebook kind of spin and start getting into genuine conspiracy theories. So briefly, my story, and I'm not going to say any more on health except my story and what it means. So I had 3 blood tests that came up very high, a liver enzyme GGT, serum ferritin, the iron loading in the blood, and the old cholesterol. And I'm just showing here what they should be. They should be below these approximate numbers. But I came in up here for GGT, up here for ferritin, and well up on cholesterol also. And I didn't know exactly what they meant, but the doctor was kind of concerned, and I looked and saw how far outside the normal distribution I actually was. So I knew it was a big deal, even though I didn't know the details. So I grilled the doctor on the 2 key questions I always ask in a complex problem. A, what are the ramifications or the implications of these kinds of values in terms of morbidity or mortality expectation? And B, what are the root causes that would drive these metrics higher? So I could start resolving things in my diet and lifestyle, whatever. And I got very poor answers from the first doctor. I went to a second one, connected in the family, much more experienced, very poor answers. And eventually a professor of medicine. And again, similarly poor answer. They threw out, oh, eat more healthy whole grains for the cholesterol, maybe eat less meat and fat, which turned out to be absolutely the opposite of what I needed to do. And they suggested potential things for the others, but they were all incorrect in the end. So unbelievable. I realized, like, wow, if I go into a field like medicine and health, and I get 3 proper experts, genuine experts, you know, and I question them to justify their knowledge, and they fall flat on their face on standard blood tests. These were standard tests. I didn't even ask for them. I said, there's something huge going on. Don't know what it is, but I just knew it was huge, huge. So when the experts don't know, it means there's a chance to beat all the experts. So I went straight to ResearchGate, PubMed, corporate logons, started looking up ferritin, the published science, didn't go to any books, didn't go to websites, went straight to ResearchGate and PubMed. And within a few weeks of intense study, I realized I had insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. It's the same thing. And I realized this was the biggest disease process on our planet. And I realized that over 60% of Americans over 45 years of age have type 2 diabetes. They call it pre-diabetes, but that's nonsense. And I realized you could fix it. So here was me in Singapore on business trip. When the engineers took a picture, I was a lot heavier and pretty angry with what I discovered. And I went for it. So my cholesterol, I looked up cholesterol, and happily I found, after finding a bunch of nonsense papers that were saying cholesterol was bad, I was reading them saying, hold on a minute, these don't make sense. This is like bias. So I began to find the proper papers, like the Norwegian Hunt study, 60,000 people, men and women, tracked over, I think it was around 10 years. And what it showed was the higher the cholesterol, the better for your longevity. And you can see here, women is red, the higher the cholesterol, all the way up over 7 millimole, way up in the tail of the population, less death, right? And men, pretty similar, more of a U-shaped curve, but higher is better. And I found a lot more like that. And I realized cholesterol was a total scam, no question. So I was happy. And I thought, hey, my high cholesterol's fine. So that was okay. And I was hoping the other 2 might be similar. My GGT is high. I'm hoping I'll find out that's bullshit too. But I didn't find that out. I found out GGT is one of the most powerful predictors for cardiovascular and all-cause mortality. The actuaries all use it in life insurance. They don't use cholesterol. They know it's nonsense. So here we had one paper I got, 7 times the risk if you're in the top quartile or quarter of GGT values in the population. I was way up there, 700% or 600% extra. Found other papers like this. And basically, for my BMI, a little overweight, and for my GGT, I had 15 times the risk of future type 2 diabetes diagnosis. 15 times. I mean, they say that meat gives you a 1.1 times more risk of cardiovascular. It's nonsense. 1.1 times. That's the WHO. 15 times. Right? This is real stuff. And the doctors had no clue. They had no clue. Serum ferritin I went to, I was concerned now. Same kind of thing. For atherosclerosis in this study, the upper quintile, top fifth of ferritin, 5 times the risk of atherosclerosis, which causes most heart attacks. Another study, carotid atherosclerosis. You can get a carotid ultrasound to see if there's buildup of disease in your main arteries to your brain. Well, that one showed 10 times the risk for men and women if you were high in ferritin. So this stuff is, there's just hundreds, thousands of papers showing this, and no one cares. And the reason no one cares is cholesterol is a big money spinner drug business, and ferritin and GGT are awkward because if you look at those, the way to get them down is to do what I'm going to tell you now. So I discovered that I was eating too much fructose, particularly orange juice is pure sugar. It's got more sugar than Coca-Cola. I was buying all that Florida orange juice stuff, real squeezed. I thought it was part of my 5 a day, right? Yeah. So I cut all that out, and I cut out any sweets and chocolate I was eating because I knew sugar and carbohydrate was the problem. I was eating reasonably good food, but I was also eating pizzas. I discovered they're full of carbohydrate and vegetable oils, which are poison. And I was just eating all the healthy carbohydrates, whole grain bread and brown rice and pasta, and smoothies, all this junk, right? I thought that was good. So the root cause solution, I switched to a high healthy fat, moderate protein, it was actually high protein, and low carbohydrate. Cut out all the junk. I eat dark chocolate instead with cream, double cream. Meat, fish, and eggs, center of the diet. Olives, high fat. Avocados, high fat. Coconut oil, high fat. Olive oil, no vegetable oil. Double cream. Butter is back. That's what I was getting all my calories for with my fix. And I'd still eat vegetables. They have minerals, and Homo sapiens are scavengers. So we thrive on meat, fish, and eggs, the real food, the ancestral food. But we'll also eat vegetables and pick up other nutrients. So I'm okay with those. I'm not full carnivore. Cut out all the rice, potatoes, and fruits, pretty much. And I switched, what I found out later, I was kind of doing a paleo low-carb diet, but I did not realize this was a thing because I had gone straight to the research database. I didn't realize there was a huge low-carb movement in the world. What happened? Well, there's my GGT at the start. I was insulin resistant, type 2 diabetic, liver inflammation, yada, yada, yada. Switched the diet, nothing else, no change in alcohol, no change in exercise, no other change. I wanted to see the diet alone first. And in 6 weeks, got more blood tests. I was down to 42. 2 more weeks, I said I'd just verify the trajectory. And so at 8 weeks, I was down to 35. So I'd fixed the GGT, the big one, the actuaries measure, right? But the ferritin collapsed too, because that's a sign of type 2 diabetes, high ferritin. The cholesterol got much better, not the total value, that's completely meaningless. And the bad LDL, bad cholesterol, that's meaningless. But the ratios between HDL and LDL, we won't get into it here. They tell you how insulin sensitive you are. My blood pressure went back to normal. It had been too high and they wanted to get me on meds for years. Blood pressure back to normal with no extra exercise. My weight dropped a lot. I went down to 80 kilos a few weeks later, and the waist dropped right down, first time in my adult life. So everything changed, not just the things I was targeting. I was not even targeting weight loss. I wasn't even thinking of weight loss. I was thinking of ferritin and GGT. but all the other stuff got dramatically, miraculously better. And in my business of root cause resolution, when the whole system gets better all across the board, when you were only trying to fix one particular problem, you got a true root cause of product quality. All boats rise. The whole production line gets better. The utilization goes up, uptime goes up, the quality goes up. These issues you didn't even really focus on get better. That's a real massive root cause. So I knew I had it cracked. And I'm going to leave it at that for the nutrition stuff. Insulin is the important thing, and insulin resistance and blood sugar, and cholesterol is pretty much nonsense unless you measure it in a special way and you're very knowledgeable. That's probably the big messages. We were lied to. We're lied to every day now on meat. Meat is an ancestral human food. We evolved on it. We became two-legged, striding hunters, and we came from the hominids up to Homo sapiens by accessing organ meats, brain, scavenging. Then we became the most successful hunters on the planet, and we hunted all the megafauna, or the big animals, to extinction. And eventually we had to kind of find other things, fish and smaller animals. We evolved on it. Meat is a health food. Organ meats are a superfood. So there are some of the myths, and it just suits industry because of the cholesterol drug business and because the food industry. So the two biggest, most influential industries on the planet are pharmaceutical and food. And for them, they want less meat, more carbohydrates, cheap vegetable oils, and sell tons of drugs for hypertension, obesity, heart disease, and all the rest that's caused by the food. That's it. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just business. And it's a business that's been running for 50 years in sixth gear. And that the media, of course, carry all the advertisements for food and pharma. The media all parrot the same nonsense. So all of this crap was before COVID. Now, when COVID came, obviously, I immediately knew it was a scam just because it has the exact same fingerprints of a scam, So I won't talk about COVID so much because the guys were saying that most people on this call know all about how COVID was nonsense and it was a severe flu equivalent. It came out of a lab, gain of function, 30-year-old technology, finally came home to roost. But I'll go into why all of this is happening. And I was in Amsterdam last August. I gave 2 talks because sadly, Professor Desmet's mother died. So they asked me on the day I was flying over, could I do a second talk? So I did 2 talks, and this is kind of one of them. And Desmet is important. My episode 150, How COVID Happened, that interview with Desmet, I think, was really important because it's why people fall for the nonsense. But we won't get into that today, but he has an amazing, and many of you may be familiar, when you have a population with widespread loneliness, head on a phone, have lost the old ancestral tribe contact with the village, they have a lack of meaning, they have free-floating anxiety in the modern world. They're the preconditions for a population to be ripe to be harvested. And then you inject a compelling narrative with propaganda and you start a mass formation. And after a while, people cling to this new nonsense because it gives them a feeling of belonging again. They feel that they've somehow helped their loneliness by being part of a collective, saving granny, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, your mask protects me. All of this nonsense, they feel they're part of something again. But that's false because they haven't actually become part of a healthy human tribe or relationship. They've actually just become a kind of a drum to the collective and to the nice man, the television. So it's false. So that's a really important thing we can maybe come back to. But today we'll go through why it's all happening, who's driving it, and all the organizations, and why they're doing it. And this is Dr. Jakob Nordengerd's content mostly. Huge appreciation to him. He discovered 25 years ago as a hippie climate fear guy, he wanted to learn more. And as he researched, he found out the climate thing goes back to the 1950s and the Rockefeller Foundation. And he said, hold on a minute. The whole climate catastrophe stuff goes back to the oil men, the richest people in the world. What's going on? And then he kept researching for the next 20 years. So he has the whole thing cracked. I went over to Stockholm last May to interview him in person. Thought it was important. He has a PhD in science technology studies and a couple of MAs. And he has his own publishing business. Great guy. And his key book really is Rockefeller Controlling the Game. And that's in English. And you'll only get it at farosmedia.se, the Swedish site. But he has a couple of books in English. But this one is the magnum opus. Unbelievable. Gives the full history of Rockefeller all the way up to 2020 and COVID starting. Fully referenced, fully photographed, the whole story. It's a fascinating story. We'll touch on it today. So the shapers of the future, right? You know this guy, World Economic Forum. And he's the Hegelian architect. He's just a manager. He's not the big guy, you know. There's much bigger guys above him. But he's the manager. He's the right sociopath to help coordinate this nonsense. And we'll start with this from Professor Samuel Huntington, Harvard University. And this is way back, I think, in the 50s. It was Davos. It would have been in the 70s. And he was an insider, a big Harvard person. And Harvard is a hotbed for the globalists. And Harvard is really kind of like a viper's nest. But he said the Davos class have little need for national loyalty, view national boundaries as obstacles that are thankfully vanishing, and see national governments as residues from the past, whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. So again, there's no conspiracy theories at all in the New World Order, in the organizations that are literally running the world. This is all published, and it has been quoted by many more than Samuel. So origins and history, going back to Nelson Rockefeller, who became the vice president with Nixon, and Henry Kissinger, who obviously was a really big character, incredibly capable sociopath. And the prospect for America, the Rockefellers decided, we want globalism, we want a world government, and we want to manage the world because it's our duty to do so. You know, you can complain all you want about them. They don't see themselves as evil. They see that politicians and ordinary people are idiots, and it's up to the smartest guys in the room to properly manage the world and its resources. They believe it. So, Special Studies Project are the sons of John D. Rockefeller, the oil baron from the early 1900s. He had 5 sons, and they set up this project with Rockefeller oil money. They set up the Council for Foreign Relations as well. You might have heard of that, the CFR. That's full of all the top brass around the world that Rockefeller can help manage them and manage their worldview geopolitically and help manage where the world is going. And Kissinger, they identified as a very interesting individual. He turned out to be. And he had written an article on nuclear weapons and foreign policy, and they spotted him and they brought him in under their wing. And of course, Kissinger, the rest is history. He became an enormously influential kind of sociopathic type figure on the world stage. The brothers formed this as a direct quote. Everything Nordengard goes through is all published in the Rockefeller archives or elsewhere. There are no conspiracy theories here. They said, we cannot escape and indeed should welcome the task which history has imposed on us. This is the task of helping to shape a new world order. Yeah, they've done great on that. In all its dimensions. Wow. Spiritual, economic, political, and social. So you can see the breadth of their vision. That's why things are so insane now, because of everything they set up has reached into all these dimensions. You know, they were not just wanting to be rich and have control of world's money, way beyond money this is. Their challenge, as they recorded, to build a new structure which will make possible the fulfillment of the basic purposes of humanity. And it's hard not to laugh. These guys are pretty sick puppies, in fairness, but they see themselves as the elite and the smartest, and this is their job to do. But to fulfill the basic purposes of humanity, you know, crazy cookies. Way back in the 50s, they identified global challenges as being the ones that were of utility for their strategies of global governance. They had to be global challenges. They had to reach across all regions. Obviously, if you're going to pull together global government responses, they identified health, and specifically pandemics was written in there, climate and environmental disaster, resource shortages, and human resources. That's overpopulation. They were really concerned, all these guys, about the increasing population. And you've heard a lot of that elsewhere from that nutbar, Billy Gates, and many more. But they identified climate change and crisis in the climate in the 1950s without a single scientist in the room. They were smart enough to know that that was the ultimate global ruse that would make people follow a global type government. The planet's going to burn up. We're all in it together. 2 weeks to cool the planet. You get the story. You know this. So that was identified. It was decades later when they funded the IPCC through the UN, and they started pressing them to find in their modeling crisis. That was decades later. So it's very important to know they identified this potential ruse in the 50s. They funded the setup of the United Nations. They supplied the land in New York, fortune, and a whole bunch of millions to set it up. And you can see there in the center of Rockefeller Capital Management, they've got their United Nations building. So they funded all that. Dr. Nordengard said they kind of viewed the United Nations as their own private club. Now, decades later, they are less influential, but the beast that is the United Nations has now got a life of its own. It's self-sufficient. It's driving this madness on its own. And Rockefeller is in the background still, pushing. But Rockefeller now is not as important because they succeeded in their goal of creating this monster that would be self-sufficient. Harvard's International Seminar, this was a big thing they set up, and it was to bring in all the movers and shakers. They had Kissinger as director, and David Rockefeller, the key Rockefeller, Chase Manhattan Bank director, and oil money man. They brought in Ford Foundation as well, and of course their own foundation, and they made Harvard a kind of a hotbed for this global vision. And it turned out later that this seminar also was funded and attended by the CIA. And that makes sense. There's no conspiracy theory. The CIA has America's interests at heart, and obviously will be involved in anything across the globe that affects American interests. That's its job. So of course it's going to be involved with the most important organizations that will literally shape the future of world geopolitics and America's role in it. So yeah, the CIA was involved from the very start. They spotted this guy from Ravensburg. The father was kind of a Nazi, equipment manufacturer, I believe. And this guy's history, Klaus Schwab, very murky, very hard to find his history. It's like it's all gray when you go back. Kind of weird. But anyway, they found him. He was over in Harvard doing an MA in business administration or something. And they spotted him like Kissinger. And they said, that's our kind of sociopath, So they brought him under their wing in 1967. And there was a video here, I won't show it, but in 50 years later, Klaus had a satellite link to the nearly 100-year-old Kissinger, and he's literally on his knees, Klaus is, gushing about how Kissinger was so important to him. And he also says that now we are beginning to realize the vision we had all those years ago in terms of a world government, right? So these guys are patting themselves on the back, done a good job. European Management Forum 71 was the earlier version, first version of the World Economic Forum. The challenges of the future. Remember, global challenges, environment, climate catastrophe, pandemics, all this nonsense, none of which is really real. And you had various top brass there, Harvard men, and the Pan-European Union. Those guys are, again, ultra-globalist on behalf of Europeans. And Barbara Ward was a British lady, and she was in Columbia University. And interestingly, even though she was kind of an economist or a financier type person, she brought in sustainable development, all about population and, resources, and the planet will fall apart if we don't do something. And she wrote a very influential book as well about that, which became a manual for these kind of nutters. This guy, Maurice Strong, became Secretary General, UN, connected in with the Club of Rome, the rich guys' climate catastrophe group, to pump propaganda on climate catastrophe. Rockefeller, of course, in there. And I only found out from Professor Richard Werner in Amsterdam that Maurice Strong was working on Rockefeller oil rigs, and he was spotted as a useful boy. And the Rockefellers arranged to have him sent to the UN, and they just got him a job as security manager, a low-level job. So they actually put him in the UN, and then they got doors opened. And he was all the way up to be at the top. Of course he did, because it's a club, he's their boy. So this guy became hugely important. Just a matter of interest, in 2020 or 21, he had to flee to China because of embezzling hundreds of millions or billions. He was actually in trouble, and he had to go. He's now living in China with enormous wealth. So you can see how, everyone looks after everyone. China brought him in, no problemo. And Only One Earth was the book from Barbara Ward and some other futurist Turkey, right? And it was all about this, population and resources, yada, yada. And that became a really important book. They began to push really hard. So Maurice Strong said, Klaus Schwab said, Maurice was my mentor since the creation of the forum, a great friend, indispensable advisor, foundation board, etc. Yeah, of course, Maurice Strong was important because he was a senior lieutenant for the Rockefellers, and he was getting inveigled into the UN so he could cause massive damage in the following decades. The Limits to Growth was another book, kind of nonsense based on programming simulations in the 70s, but they set up the Club of Rome. Aurelio Pecci, he was a big man in fiat. The money came from Giovanni Agnelli, who's the richest man in Italy, also a personal buddy of David Rockefeller, and also, I think, a director in Chase Bank. So, I don't need to point out here. It's like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you're not in it. That's just the way it is. And global management, always global management, global government, it will be needed. So the Davos Manifesto then came up, 73, right around the same time. The management has to serve society. It must assume the role of a trustee of the material universe for future generations. Yada, yada, yada. Crazy stuff. But in the 70s, they had a long vision and they were preparing everything. So they set up Davos. And the guy who set it up was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. And just a matter of interest, he also was the founder of Bilderberg. Right. So all in it together. And this movie came out in 2015. It was probably censored, but it had a great question. What do people who have almost infinite money talk about in private? And it's very private. They go to islands and everything, and no minutes, no press, no nothing. And they're talking about the stuff I'm talking about today. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about all of this stuff and how well it's going. sadly. The new international economic order, the Trilateral Commission, founded in 1973 by Rockefellers, right? Extremely powerful. Top brass all over the world are in the Trilateral Commission. Presidents, prime ministers, etc. And their magazine was Foreign Affairs. That was their magazine. And Gardner, the ambassador, quoted in 74, in short, the House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. It will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion, but an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Of course, that's what they've been doing for the last 50 years. And he was actually correct. You know, they did pretty good. Anyone who lived through COVID would certainly know that. And the Council on Foreign Relations, yeah, that's their magazine. And yeah, the Council of Foreign Relations, sorry, there's Trilateral and also the CFR. CFR is also Rockefeller. It's all Rockefeller. Rockefeller's fingerprints are all over everything, right? And this guy, very important guy, Gardner, that's his quote, he was a special consultant to the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Special Studies Project, which is basically all of this stuff. So everywhere you go, everything connects, not circumstantially, intimately and powerfully in a root cause network fashion. All connected. Only technocrats can save us. We jump forward here. This is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, Parag Khanna. If you want a better world for your children, don't hold your breath for global democratic deliberation. They hate nationalism, sovereignty, and democracy, obviously. The worst climate scenarios get, yeah, what's this idiot know about climate? I'll tell you nothing, but it's a useful tool. The more the decision makers will be forced into radical top-down measures overseen by technocrats, not activists. And of course then, this article, same guy, the pandemic proves only technocrats can save us. And they've got this reprehensible reptile, who you're all familiar with. One of the most disgusting excuses for a human being on the planet, though I know there's a lot of competition for that role. So Vagar is another nutter, a futurist type person, and the World Future Society he was involved in setting up. And he said there's no better time to implement radical changes than after a worldwide catastrophe. And they knew this to the core, every one of them. You need terrorism, you need wars, you need financial crashes, you need climate catastrophe, you need pandemics when you get your laboratory working properly. All global issues that they can use in a disaster capitalism way. Technocracy as the highest state of capitalism. And it's actually fascism, and we'll get to Mussolini's definition of fascism a little later. It's the alliance of corporate and state. And he was correct. That is the definition. So they have the next 25 years. It's all about population being too big, etc. And Nelson Rockefeller, the vice president at the time, sponsored the whole madness. 1975. Club of Rome also heavily involved. Shaping the future agenda. So here's Strong. He's getting a bit older and fatter, but he's a big guy. They're at the World Economic Forum in '87. It's been renamed the World Economic Forum from the European, so they're doing good. And Joel de Rosnay, another futurist nutter. So it's like the evil bad guys with all the money and influence who want to run the world with a global government. They always bring in futurists and authors like this guy, because these guys talk the exact kind of nonsense they want to hear. I know I'm being scathing here, but this is so self-evident. And World Economic Forum, Club of Rome, joined at the hip, the climate catastrophe, richest man in Italy kind of club. And here is Strong in 1972. We have 10 years to stop the catastrophe. Well, did you notice in 1982 that the world didn't implode? Yeah, me too. And now 40 more years, nothing's changed. Nothing. Because it's all a scam, right? But he goes on the record, he doesn't care, because he knows the media is bought enough that they won't go and say, hey, you were talking crap 10 years ago. You know, no one follows up. And global warming is specifically, they were thinking global ice age because of us, the humans, but then they realized that the trends were showing a slight warming, and they began to understand enough science to realize after the last ice age, we're going through a cycle in the 20th century of natural warming. So they jumped on warming and they decided that's the one. And here we are, okay? Rosnay, futurologist, like I said, he was all obsessed with an emergence of a cybernetic superorganism, which he called the symbionte, and the planetary brain, that we'd all be, with computers and chips, we'd all become a cybernetic, you know, species. So this is the kind of nutters they bring in, you know, unsurprisingly. UN, Our Common Future, 1987. Now, this is getting serious. So we have Harlem Brundtland, the Brundtland Commission, connecting in with the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, and of course, Strong, representing basically big oil on both sides. You know, that family is Statoil shareholders. And Rockefeller Foundation, in this Common Future UN kind of vision, Rockefeller specifically demanded that sustainable development and climate change were included. That was their funding. They wanted climate change, global warming as part of the Common Future UN plans, and they got it. Agenda 21, quite famous. I used to think it was a conspiracy theory, and it actually means 21st century. I used to think it was the agenda to achieve by 2021. But no, it's the 21st century. And that was 92. They did the Rio de Janeiro climate. And amazingly, they got 193 countries, I believe, to sign up to this nonsense. And if you read it, it's all in lovely language, all save granny, 2 weeks, flattened curve kind of stuff. But if you read it critically, it's frightening what they're talking about. In our hands, Earth Summit. In whose hands? Well, in the hands of the guys I've just been describing for the last 20 minutes. Some hands. But they got 193 countries to sign up and commit to following this agenda. And like, they must have opened all the champagne that would fill a room afterwards. These guys, they got 193 countries to sign up because their useful idiot politicians came along to this thing and they just signed on our behalf. It's crazy. Now I'm going to do a quick check that I'm actually still in the meeting. Can someone say something?
Of course, we can hear you.
Oh.
Listening.
You know, imagine something went wrong and I'm talking for nothing. Okay, gotcha, great stuff. So, in our hands, yeah, disgusting. Earth Charter Commission, then, these guys didn't stop for a moment. They had the Earth Charter Commission, Queen Beatrix now, big shell money, chaired by Stephen Rockefeller, David's son, I think. No, Nelson's son, I think. Exxon money, Morris Strong, Gorbachev, getting the Russians in as well. Oh, yeah. And I forget who this fella is, but no doubt a very bad person. And oil money on both sides. And she, Queen Beatrix, is a daughter of Prince Bernhard, who had set up the Bilderberg and also the Davos Manifesto. So you get the idea. And, he's the son of Nelson Rockefeller, Stephen is, yeah. So this is a family tradition. It's not about money. It's about the Rockefellers believing their destiny is to create a world government that will be ruled by the elite, and ordinary people, countries and politicians, they're too stupid to manage themselves. Therefore, we need to do this. And I think it's important to recognize that. Vision for the World 2002, more crazy nut stuff. The Great Transition, Visions and Pathways. And you see here the first hints of Build Back Better. They didn't use the phrase until 2020, but broken world, we need to build back better, right? But it wasn't broken. The only problem was pollution, and in corporate industrial pollution, which in fairness got fixed pretty well in some cases. But there was no problem, but they wanted to say it was warming. Because CO2, all of us, when we live and thrive and improve our GDP and have better lives and lift people out of poverty and have more freedoms and democracy, that all makes CO2. So it's no surprise they picked that as the enemy, right? No surprise. Earth Charter, the more UN environmental stuff, Rockefeller up to his neck in it and chaired by Stephen Rockefeller. The Club of Rome also heavily involved, of course, because they create propaganda and fear to help grease these initiatives through. That's their job, create fear. And they do a good job. Build Back Better, yeah, it wasn't out yet, but you can see it in the planet. Triggers for the transformation. Now, this is the Great Transition Initiative 2006 document. Another path to general crisis might be initiated by an unprecedented pandemic. You don't say, whoa. But we haven't had one in 100 years, and we had the Hong Kong flu, and kind of most scientists would say that the viruses now have leveled out with the human hosts, and the chances of a pandemic are vanishingly small now because we have nutrition and we have hygiene, and those days are gone. No. There could be a pandemic, yeah, out of a lab. And they describe all this in these documents, you know, pandemic, climate, the whole stuff. The World Union of the Great Transition, and they all talk about their vision before the crisis. Global governance was effective in one area, trade, regulation, privatization. But then they say that after the crisis, that they are trying desperately to get the World Court, a reconstituted World Union, formerly the United Nations, and the World Regulatory Authority, descended from the Bretton Woods. This is what they're all talking about. And these are not just a bunch of futurist writers. These are the most powerful people in the world by a million miles, are all fantasizing and planning this stuff. So it's not surprising it happened because all the money and all the influential people are in it. Now, I won't show this video, but yeah, it was just Klaus talking about how he has half the Canadian cabinet in his pocket, and we have Trudeau and we have Merkel, and you know that famous clip where he just basically admits we've got all the politicians in our pocket, and he admits it on camera. It's quite funny. Here were the global leaders of tomorrow of the World Economic Forum in 1993. You can see some familiar faces there. Tony Blair, war criminal, global ID promoter. He didn't get away with that in the UK. We have Brown, we have Merkel has been disgusting. And anyway, the head of the commission. Young global leaders 2004, going forward a decade. Familiar faces, Macron turned France into a police state during COVID. This other reptile, similar for New Zealand. This moron who goes on about climate all the time. And Black Lives Matter, yeah, we know what happened to that one. And Kurz, Austrian Chancellor. Austria was the only country in Europe pretty much that actually forced a mandate with fines. And Finland in there. And I just showed the clip again. And 4,000 leaders in the Young Global Leaders so far. 4,000 leaders they have through the program, and they all know what the world needs. And that's why all our leaders, politicians, our Prime Minister in Ireland, Leo Varadkar, young global leader. He was introduced and praised fulsomely by Klaus Schwab a couple of years ago on stage. So our politicians are all going off to the really rich and powerful real leaders, and they're being brought in, wined and dined and put in workshops, and then they come out indoctrinated. And the only people they want to please after that are the guys up there. They tolerate the people who vote for them underneath them, but they probably view them with contempt. And they just tell them what they want to hear to get the votes. But they're all reporting up through the EU, up to the UN, up to the WEF. That's just the structure of how the world is organized now and what we have to push back against. Bill and Justin. Bill was one of the first young global leaders, the very first batch, 1992. And someone told me recently, I think it was Professor Werner, Bill Gates' father was a big lawyer, big wheel in the Rockefeller kind of empire. And he just surmised that when they wanted to get into computers, because the computer age was starting, they might have said, hey, Bill Sr., your son's kind of a nerd. Maybe we could use him. So maybe Bill never really did anything at all worth a damn. He was just put in the position as a safe, known pair of hands, and the rest was, he was helped with the rest, right? I don't know, that's speculation. And this other very, very evil man, obviously, Trudeau. 2020 initiative, 2005 this was, they were doing all these scenarios. The young global leaders were all brought together to do 2020 initiative to formulate a vision. You know how this corporate stuff works. Everyone walks out of there all indoctrinated, and they had to create task forces on priority issues, develop global and regional strategies. That's how a lot of this nonsense crept into our local councils and our local political structures. It was all emanating from the mothership. Of course. Global Risks Report 2006. And I think this was World Economic Forum, not Rand Corporation. The risk of a pandemic flu, particularly one caused by human-to-human transmission, of course, and global, of course. Of H5N1 or another avian flu virus. You always hear them blathering on about bird flu for the last 20 years. It's just complete nonsense. It makes no difference to anyone. But they said it's now a dominant theme. So see, in 2006, they were making a future pandemic a dominant theme in the global conversation on risk. I mean, in 2006, and you're looking at the world just before the financial crisis, and all the Syria and Afghanistan and China growing in power, right, and nuclear power, and then maybe Iran looking at getting nukes. And they say the biggest risk for the globe is a fucking pandemic. I mean, sorry, but you can just show the culpability and the guilt in all of these published documents. And they also said a lack of information or misinformation leading to a breakdown in public trust in the ability of governments, international institutions, or business and the corporates to manage risk could lead to the spread of fear and ways that greatly amplify the consequences of a particular threat. You see the irony? Their misinformation massively amplified a flu-level threat. But of course, they knew when we run this crap in the future, if people are all talking about it and asking questions, it won't work. So even in 2006, they were planning censorship. On the record. Global Technological Revolution 2006. This was, I think this is World Economic Forum as well, or it could have been, oh no, this was Rand Corporation, the kind of military think tank. I'm pretty sure. National Intelligence Council. This is the same time. They were talking about RFID, tracking of commercial products and potentially individuals. Technologies for 2020, tracking commercial goods, buying patterns, and even individual movement for security and targeted advertising and for our safety. So, I mean, Rand was in there as well, right? Management of the commons. The global financial crisis came along, and in fairness, that was inevitable with the subprime mortgage and all the tranches and the corruption in the ratings agencies. So it wasn't like they created that, but when it blew up, they exploited it massively. So WF went into overdrive. They jumped on it. They held a global agenda summit in Dubai, its first global agenda summit in the middle of this mess. They set up a global brains trust. That's reminiscent of Rockefeller in the 50s and 60s. They set up brain trusts. And bringing together the best minds and foremost experts, the summit on the global agenda is the starting point for global efforts to redesign our international system according to the needs of the 21st century. Their needs, of course, their needs. And that's where the Great Reset type theme began to emerge, 2008. The Brains Trust They had 70 global councils and 1,500 experts. Now, of course, they were just, you know, they were useful experts. They were the proper experts, and they were carefully chosen. You don't want real experts in there saying, hey guys, what are you talking about? Obviously. Shaping the post-crisis world, 2009, you know, you see Putin's in there. Klaus talked about the warm friendship he had with Putin, and we have great relations until Ukraine. That was generally the case. And the global agenda councils I mentioned are created and include Russia. Digital Marshall Plan was discussed in a big report. And they said there was a lack of trust, a lack of incentives, a lack of institutions, and a lack of time to basically put together a global redesign, a great reset. So that was 2010, I think. And they even proposed a potential structure of e-governments to engage with the people. You know, they were really ahead of the curve. Kissinger in the New York Times in 2009, if anyone ever accuses you of being a conspiracy theorist for using the term New World Order, and we've already seen in prior slides, they used it, they coined it at the start of Rockefeller Brothers Fund in the 1950s. They said a new world order is required in all dimensions. But funnily enough, in 2009, New York Times, Kissinger, it's the title of his article, The Chance for a New World Order. I mean, come on. The ultimate challenge is to shape our common concern of most countries regarding the economic crisis. Oh yeah, together with a common fear of jihadist terrorism. Now that was one they used a lot many years ago to get in the Patriot Act and a lot of other things, into a common strategy reinforced by the realization new issues like proliferation, energy, and climate change permit no national or regional solution. So of course, Kissinger knew since the 50s that we were going to this point. So he must have been very pleased at around 90 to be seeing they're actually finally getting to the execution of the nonsense. Global management of planet, G20, upgraded from G6 and G7. Global governments, 2009, they declared the first year of global governments, right? The climate conference in Copenhagen is another step towards the global management of our planet. And that's the president of the EU Council. So they're not hiding this shit, guys. In fairness, it's all documented and all published. That's the irony. That's why I love Nordengerd's work. He will not talk about the Rothschilds or anything that's not fully published, because he knows then you will just get accused of being a conspiracy theorist or whatever. This, by the way, the G20 has plenty of young global leaders in there, unsurprisingly. So nicely seeded with the right stuff. The G20, I won't go through this, but again, enormous power and influence, and up to its neck in banks. World Trade, World Bank Group, IMF, and I'm surprised the Bank of International Settlements isn't listed there. But yeah, all the banking, which is kind of the head of the Hydra in many ways. The key role of G20 is to coordinate the UN, the World Bank, and the OECD, which are already very coordinated, as I've explained, but G20 is to make damn sure they're all in lockstep. You will be familiar maybe with 2010 scenarios for the future from Rockefeller Foundation. They laid out everything we're seeing, and lockstep, where people pushed back against global governance in a crisis like a pandemic. They wrote down exactly what happened in COVID. If you read it, you'd think it was written after COVID. It hits every single button. Misinformation, mistrust, clamping down. Governments had to take action, had to lock down people. Literally, but that was written in 2010. They knew exactly what they were going to pull. Global Shapers community. You see here Schwab, the old pervert. They put together a WEF grassroots network. Internet influencers, young people under the age of 30. They have 479 hubs in 150 countries. The problem with these guys, of course, is they have so much money, infinite printed mouse click money, that they can do this stuff. I mean, there's 14,000 shapers. So when you see all these morons on TikTok or saying, get your vaccine, and, oh, we need to lock down 2 weeks. We need 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Most of them are members of this grassroots network. They've been very well indoctrinated in what's required. And what they do when they pull their COVID type thing, all they do is they contact all their members, say, hey guys, we gotta, remember what we learned? Oh yeah, okay. And out they go. So that's why we're seeing all these influencers around the world go nuts. It's kind of like, how are they all going nuts at the same time? Now, new members must be endorsed by an existing shaper or a WEF existing community member. They're quite careful here because they know there's a risk here. You let in a few wrong people, could be whistleblowers. So they keep this membership very tight, and they're right. They're right to keep it tight. If you're going to run a real conspiracy, you got to be pretty careful, in fairness. Public-private partnership 2015. The time has come for a new stakeholder paradigm of international governance. That means the corporates work with the governments. The corporates are smarter than the politicians, so that means the corporates run the game. Pretty much, that's it. And here, as I said, Mussolini. I'm a World War II buff. I've watched thousands of hours of World War II documentaries and books, and I knew this intimately anyway. Fascism should be more appropriately called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power. It's the same in National Socialism in Germany, and in many ways, Soviet Russia, apparently a different system altogether, was very similar. They take over the means of production, and the factory owners and the factories become part of the elite with the government. Yeah, corporatism, but it's fascism. Global goals 2015, they laid out all this silly stuff. Some of it's reasonable, but you see what they've done with like inequalities? They're bringing in cultural Marxism, obviously, all over the world, because that weakens people. It takes away their history, their culture, their traditions, and it basically takes away all their certainties and all their beliefs, and it replaces it with utter nonsense. So that's a ploy to just weaken the societies to help kind of take over. Everything connects together. And I pulled out a few there: life on land, life below water. These guys want it all. Climate action, renewable energy, health, think vaccines and useless drugs. Sustainable cities and communities. 15-minute cities, anyone? Consumption. You're eating too much meat this week. Your CBDC, electronic chip in your hand, will not function. This is what they want. This is what they want. Simple. Fourth Industrial Revolution, the book comes out in 2016. It's putting a layer of techno-babble nonsense on top of all these plans, right? And you might be familiar with that book. You can buy it and read it. It's like looking into the abyss. Reshape humans and the planet. This is 2018. Now we're getting close to COVID, right? Shaping the fourth industrial revolution, increasing digital technology, reshaping the physical world, artificial intelligence and robotics, altering the human, neuro and biotechnology, right? Transhumans, integrating the environment with space technology, geoengineering. But space technology was mostly talking about surveillance from space. Go figure. Systems initiatives, they're nothing if not ambitious. Look at all these centers they're setting up and areas they want to control. There isn't really anything that's not on that, right? They're not messing around. The partners, all big tech, of course. And these are only the top funding partners of the World Economic Forum. I think it is $500 million a year of cash pumps in for all their propaganda and stuff. But these are the top partners. Of course, Goldman Sachs is there, JP Morgan, Citibank, BlackRock, MasterCard, Visa, AstraZeneca. You know, I could go, and the oil. Big oil is in there up to their neck as well, of course. And welcome the vaccine tyrants, of course, and open society, George Soros. I mean, do your conspiracy theory bingo here. You'll fill a card. It's easy because none of it's a conspiracy theory. It's just a conspiracy of interests. old-fashioned. I pulled this from their website, and I'll just list them. These are the wider group of partners. Find any big-sized corporate or company or bank that's not in there. You're not going to find one. They're all in there. They're all paying members. The centers for the fourth industrial revolution, they got them all over the world set up. This is the Russian one. So the Russians are in too. The board of trustees, and any corporate guys know, board of trustees is not just members. They're kind of very important, high-level directors, you know, of the WEF. Who's up the top? Banks. All banks, including Sberbank, Russian Bank. They're all in there. The Bank of International Settlements, the Bank of Banks, the Central Bankers Bank, right? Alibaba Group, oh yeah, trustee, and some German thing here, and a few big heavy hitters on climate and fake food, and of course the Council of Foreign Relations, Rockefeller's elite think tank, and Carlyle, I think they're a mega investment company. So that's it, that's their trustees. So is it any surprise we have the trouble we have? And the trustees 2019 pulling out some key people. Look at this one. You know who she is. Lagarde as well. Jack Ma from Alibaba. Al Gore. Anyway, I don't know the others so well. And of course, these boys. Rubenstein, Larry Fink, BlackRock and Carlyle. Remember way back in Davos 73, the management has to serve society and must assume the role of a trustee of the material universe. But they're not interested in future generations of ordinary people. They're interested in their people's future, right? Just the way it is. And the Council for Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, also on the trustees. This was really important in 2019 in June. You're going to see a whole lot of stuff that got rushed through just before COVID. WEF officially signed into a contract with the UN to help fund the goals, the 17 goals. This is one of the most important events that happened in our history, right, the last century. But no media covered it. No mainstream media. We know about it now. Nordengard found out, other people found out. No media coverage, nothing. Huge thing. Now, there might have been some somewhere, but it was just lost in the noise. The common agenda, and that's what we're in now, financing the 2030 agenda that was called 2020, or the Agenda 21, now it's 2030. They're really focused on 2030. They want to get in as much madness as they can in the next 5 or 6 years. As much legal structures, you know about the WHO pandemic treaty and the World Health Regulations, where they've taken out all the non-binding wording for all countries. All of that is about getting the legal stuff in place. Most of the huge tyrants and totalitarians in history, they changed the law before they went ahead with their stuff. And technically, a lot of them were within the law because they made the law accommodate their badness. So we see here climate change, health, digital cooperation, gender. Anyone noticed the last year or two, it's like someone opened the crazy box on gender stuff? Was that just me? Someone opened a box of crazy, spilled it out all over the place. It's coming from the same place. It's coming from the same place. Technology, again, it's all about technology, world economy, technocracy. That's what it is. Tops down. This thing, I think, went on in Japan, Society 5.0. They layer their stuff with technobabble. It's hilarious to read through it, and I'm just reading it saying, this is nonsense. But it's beautifully presented, and it will fool 99.99% of politicians. They'll swallow it without a second thought. Well, Society 5, oh, we're going to be part of that. This is the way it is. The one thing these guys were correct about is that politicians are idiots. They were correct about that 70 years ago when they decided they'd have to run the world. Global governance, here's the high-level view. It's a useful chart, just a one glance on your fridge. UN, G20, World Economic Forum. is the global governance. Below that level is regional, where you have the EU and the other regions. Nationals below that, and very much just taking the lead from the EU and above. And then there's a local level, but most of these are infested by NGOs. Local councils are all up to their necks in gender stuff. So we know the local level has been contaminated severely also. And then individual level, you're down to individuals. And this is where we are. But there's lots of us on a positive note. And the awareness of this is growing. There's no question. The awareness is growing a lot. So executing the future agenda. And I know there's a lot here, guys. We can do Q&A after, but there's just a lot in this. This futurist vagar, no better time to implement radical changes than after catastrophe. That's what COVID's about. That's what many of wars are about. They're all about problem, reaction, solution. Encourage problems, get the reaction, which are propaganda, to scare everyone around the globe on the problems. No point just scaring one country. And then give the solution that you have already packaged. And then people go, oh, yeah, you got a solution. Humans are that stupid. It works. It's worked for all of human history, that strategy. Decade of Action started September 2019. Ooh, we've got to suddenly double down on our efforts for Agenda 2030. And that was September 19. Decade of Action, shaping our future, of course. That little Swedish Egypt, Greta, went to New York in a sailing boat. An amusing kind of little side note is it was called Militia, which actually means malice. So I don't know, is that a coincidence? And the motto was, unite behind the science. It's always the science. And that's a 60-year-old echo of Rockefeller, way back at the start of this. Unite behind the science was actually used back then in a certain passage. That science was the thing that could get the world government, because science crosses boundaries all over the world. People work together, even in difficult times and in war. They work on the science. It's kind of a universal global thing, the science. That's why they stole it. That's why we hear the phrase all the time. Planetary Emergency Plan, September 2019. Think of the timing. They launched a planetary emergency plan. We are in the middle of a planetary emergency. Climate, biodiversity, and health crisis. All untrue. All patently and actually obviously untrue. But they launched a planetary emergency plan. And of course, they have to address these as one integrated challenge, right? Club of Rome, again, providing the propaganda and the fear. And it is a reminder of 20 years ago, or 2002, which I showed you earlier, the Great Transition, right? What they said back then was the forces of global order take action. This is their vision for 20 years' time, which is around now. International military, corporate, and governance bodies supported by the most powerful national governments form the self-styled Alliance for Global Salvation. It's almost religious, right? They're using religious kind of wording. Using a revamped United Nations as their platform, a state of planetary emergency is declared. Well, that's what was declared in 2019. I just showed you. A campaign of overwhelming force, rough justice, and draconian police measures sweeps through hotspots of conflict and discontent or misinformation. They said all this in 2002. That was their vision. All documented, all written in books and big official documents. But no one knows about them. Media won't talk. Here's the great-great-granddaddy of them all. October 2019, Event 201. You could not make this up. A massive simulation, didn't talk at all about cures and treatments. No. Brought in world leaders in media, politicians, and other organizations, and talked pretty much about misinformation if there was a coronavirus pandemic. I'm not joking. You'd think they'd say a flu pandemic in this simulation in October 2019, not to look so obvious. But they didn't. Out of their ass, they said a coronavirus pandemic could happen. Could happen. But within the next 50 years, Bill? Yeah, maybe sooner. About January. Right? A couple of months later. That's how stupid this is. It's so obvious. And yeah, they said cooperation, industries, national governments, industry, government, fascism. That's what it is. Key international institutions, they're all corrupt. And it was funded and led by Bill and Melinda, of course, Johns Hopkins, who are utterly captured, and the World Economic Forum itself. And they ran the simulation and basically told them, hey guys, here's what we need to do. Misinformation is going to be a problem. And that's what we saw, of course, in 2020. We got our pandemic, 11th of March, this Turkey, right? They'd said this 50 years ago, they're going to be looking at a pandemic. Well, we got it out of a lab. And censorship came down like an enormous hammer, as you're all aware of, because they had simulated that and they've been talking about misinformation for 25 years in their simulations. Lockstep scenario I mentioned, and you can just read the stuff from 2010. It's just exactly what happened, of course. I won't show this video, but basically it's Klaus gushing. We need a great reset, right? This is 21, I think. And I'm not going to show it. It also shows Guterres, we need a great reset, right? Head of the UN, and Prince Charles, we need a great reset. All talking together. And this video I won't show, you might have seen it. It shows all the world's leaders in speeded up version talking about building back better, including Greta. All the world's leaders over a period of 6 or 8 months are here saying build back better, all saying the same phrase. It's like a monkey could see how this is done. Anyway, I won't make you suffer through those donkeys. So shaping the future of health, WEF and UN got together in 16, all talking about health, all stuffed with vaccine and bankers and big pharma, of course. That's 16. They're really gearing up to get everyone in the bed together on the health front. They talked all about artificial organs and, of course, fake food, artificial food. I mean, it's just a who's who of futuristic, dystopian nonsense. And I know from my 10 years in the medical world, it's really grossly overrated, these genomics things and individualized medicine. Some of the things are good, but most of it actually forget about it, you know. Co-creating the future of vaccines, this was 2019, March, right? Immunization Agenda 2030. All the visions and goals, all documented in 19. The EU had a plan for 2021, written in 2018, a plan for kind of global vaccine passports. That was written in 17, 18. It's in there, it's documented. It's in their vaccine plans. The Commons project came up in 2019. This is an interesting one I spotted when I realized in May 2020 or June, I was hoping that COVID was just a swine flu pharma scam. But I was beginning to realize this one's much bigger. And I discovered that the Commons project was set up in the middle of 2019, a common pass for vaccines and health. The fellow who set it up was a young global leader funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, mid-19. And if you look at the Google records for search, there was a big spike in searches for this thing around middle 19, and then it was quiet for a good while. And then in February, March 2020, the searches for this thing shot up again. And there was heavy representation of the searches in Switzerland and Geneva, and I think New York. Come on, guys. All prepared well in advance. EU Health Pass then, of course, came to pass, July 21. But all the work was done in advance, of course. global health architecture. I won't talk on this because I've been going on for ages. This is the pandemic treaty madness that's going to fly through all over the world unless more people rise up. The World Health Organization, this is their website, took a shot. Global Digital Health Certification Network they want. This is beyond the pandemic treaty and the global health regulations. They want changed into pure totalitarianism, where the countries will have to answer to the WHO whenever they announce a fake, I'm not joking, a PHEIC, a public health emergency of international concern. They can announce a fake anytime they want. Tedros can say it. He can pull it out of his ass. And all the countries are heading towards signing up to this, that the WHO, which is basically a pharmaceutical organization, corrupt, can declare a fake, and everyone, it's binding. Everyone has to do whatever. If they want to say you got to jump up and down or get under the bed to save granny, it's the law, man. It's the law. But they also have this digital health thing, and this is all documented. They're going to have everyone's health records all over the world. They want a central system that can be used for travel or anything else. And there's a trust anchor to make sure that all our people's data is safe. There's keys and encryption, and there's a trust network with a trust anchor. You know who the trust anchor is? The WHO. I mean, that's like saying, oh, Mengele is our trusted medical research anchor. I mean, it's just, you couldn't make this stuff up. And hopefully, I hope this is not depressing, but the thing is, you have to know the reality, and then we have to push back against it. And there's no point hiding from it. Digital credentials. The biggest prize in the universe for these crazies is digital ID, and that gives you central bank digital currency, and that gives you ultimate control. So that's where it's going. G20 agenda, all about digital, global health, sustainable energy, of course. This other WEF Global Agenda Council guy, Schellenhuber, COVID reflects a broader trend. More planetary crises are coming. Of course they are, because you're making them. If we muddle through each new crisis while maintaining the same economic model that got us here, future shocks will eventually exceed the capacity of governments. Blah, blah, blah. Indeed, the corona crisis has already done so, and we know it's a flu. And he's saying it was an actual crisis, and there'll be more of them. So this is where we are. Oh, by the way, he's Club of Rome. I explained Club of Rome, rich guys propaganda, fear, propaganda, propulsion kind of center with loads of money. February 22, yeah, of course, war in Ukraine. I don't know if these things get agreed between Putin and the top brass, and they're literally on the blower, and then they go into countries. I sometimes suspect that everything that happens is pretty much agreed in advance. And then they all go and they do their pantomime and theater and pretend, oh, you entered, we're going to do. I would guess the guys at the top table, like between China, Russia, and then the kind of US, Western, and WEF. I'm just guessing, like in corporate, they're all kind of talking at the top and carving up pies and, moving things in the chessboard and playing by the rules. I don't know, that speculation. That's what I'd guess. That would make sense to me. Energy crisis, of course, came out of Ukraine. And that just feeds energy fear, and food crisis. This didn't really take, but you heard a lot about food and energy after Ukraine, and it kind of faded away again, but it's coming. The extra CO2 we put in the atmosphere has been an incredibly lucky thing for the planet, because the deserts are greening, the plants need less moisture because there's more CO2 and they thrive, and agricultural outputs are all going up. The guys running this show hate that. They hate that. They want yields to go down. They want there to be crisis, people not to have children, people to be in fear. So they really pissed off at CO2, not just for the original reason to use it as a scam, but the CO2 going up is actually making the planet healthier and better. And that really drives them crazy, I would guess. So, Hack Attack, I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to finish up now. In order to shape the future, you have to visualize the future, you have to design the future, and then you have to execute. That's what this guy has helped manage on behalf of the big boys. Control the narrative. That's it. This video was Cyber Polygon. It was just showing how they worked with Russia and all over the world in 2020 on a cyber attack. It's just more of the same stuff. The quality of the videos is amazing because, of course, they have endless money to put into this nonsense. Food system transitions, yeah, they have great plans for fake food, of course, and you're seeing a lot of that, like Beyond Burger and Gates and all the, fake food is the way they want to go. And energy, smart cities, of course, 15-minute cities, AI, blah, blah, blah. All of this crap is part of their great transition that no one should be within a million miles of. It's all technocratic nonsense. And smart grids is just to track people and control. Internet of Everything's the same. ID 2020, that was started a few years ago. Who funded it? Rockefeller Foundation, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and Microsoft, Bill Gates. And Gavi, by the way, is pretty much Bill Gates. So Bill Gates and Rockefeller essentially are behind Digital ID 2020. And Bill Gates said in an interview, well, of course, everyone's going to have one. And then that interview on a big platform, 2020, I saw it. For the first 10 hours afterwards, that was left in, and then it was taken out. You could see the edit. They took out when he said everyone's going to have one, because they wanted to say it's just for poor people over in Africa. They're entitled to a digital ID. It's their right to have one, and we're trying to help them, the poor people. But of course, Gates, as usual, let it slip and said everyone's going to have one. And they took that out around 10 hours later when Gates's people realized, we can't say that. So these guys keep making mistakes too. Carbon credits, CBDC, huge topic. I'm not going to get into it here, but if they get that, we are in serious trouble. We're not in trouble now. There's all to play for. They get CBDC. Be like the Canadian truckers. It'll be like the Chinese when the bank took all their money. They couldn't travel up and protest because all their phones went red. COVID, couldn't travel. So that's a problem. And obviously the inference is they love the Chinese system and they want it in the West. They love it. Total control and management. What would technocrats like more than total control? I'll tell you, nothing. Future of the global commons. Yeah, common agenda we went through, and I'm going to speed now. Clever together scenario they also had with the lockdown scenario back in 2010, but this is the one they want. Global oversight and governance structures sprang up, not just for energy, but for disease and technology standards. Nation states lost some of their power and importance as global architecture strengthened and regional governance structures emerged. International oversight entities like the UN took on new levels of authority. So they were basically saying what they were going to do in COVID in lockstep scenario, and in the same document they were saying what we're going to do on our side. This is the vision. And it all goes back, and this is finishing it. It all goes back to this Rockefeller stooge, right? And the Stockholm Conference of the UN in 1972, and Only One Earth. I mean, this was literally the kind of the genesis or the seed of everything that grew from it afterwards. And at the age of 87, Rockefeller himself wrote in his memoirs. He said, I'm accused of wanting a one world government and a new world order. Well, he said, if that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. So again, they are proud of it. And this is not a proven quote like the last one, but this was an insider whistleblower at one of their big conferences in 91. They had the media all involved in these kind of big think tanks. And apparently he said, it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity. So he was thanking the media for working together with them to make sure that no one really heard about what they were doing. And he said the supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries. And again, it's not a proven quote, but it fits precisely with what I would expect. And as I say, it was a whistleblower who said that's what they were saying. And that is it. There's a bit in there, guys, but there is the recording to go back and look at your favorite pieces of published real data that tell us why what's happening is happening. And how do I
Wow.
unshare?
Mind blowing. Don't you miss the times that we were whining about the statins and all this horse crap?
No, simpler, happy days they were, because the statins were voluntary. So I never got that worked up about the statins. I know a load of doctors so angry that they're damaging people's health. And I kind of said, well, it's buyer beware. I mean, no one's being forced. But then the vaccine came. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I didn't unshare, but I don't think I'm sharing now, am I?
No, you stopped sharing.
Oh, I don't know how I did that. I don't remember doing it. But the slides were there till the end, were they? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned that we weren't forced, and I know many people that we were registered in the health insurance as statins deniers, that we reject taking it.
Yeah, the denier was always, and Asim Malhotra, a good friend of mine, the cardiologist, and also another very good friend of mine, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who's brilliant, and Zoe Harcombe, another great buddy. There was a newspaper article about them that actually used the word murder in big letters, that because they come out and said statins are kind of useless and they cause all these problems, they got a journalist to do a big article accusing them effectively of murder, because 10,000 people could die this year because they might not take their statins. It's all
exactly.
nonsense. It's all nonsense.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Crazy shit.
Yeah. Okay, so just one more question before I will invite the rest of the audience to participate in a Q&A. If you still have time, I mean, it's amazing. So we are just enjoying it. So I wish you were less of a great root cause analyst. So my question is, how do you see this going forward, and what kind of solution do we have for that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and we talked at length in Amsterdam conference, and more recently in Sweden. There was a conference that had big sessions around that after the speakers had gone through material like I went through today. I think really there's two major strands. One is that only grassroots will work, and that's all that ever worked in totalitarian systems. I mean, awareness spreading is crucial. I know it's hard because people have been trained like Pavlov's dogs. If they hear anything about powerful organizations influencing geopolitics in the world, they've been trained to think that's a conspiracy theory. It's astonishing. It's been going on for 30 years. Most people are hypnotized by that. But we still have to push it. And I always say, always refer to published papers, always refer to mainstream articles. Say, no, I saw in the Telegraph, I can send you the article. It was the British Telegraph. It said that the lockdowns had effectively no measurable benefit and they had enormous cost. I mean, try and stick to published kind of bona fide stuff and try and convert people, because grassroots is the only thing that's going to do it. The only thing that's going to stop our politicians bending over for these crazies is if the people under them push them really hard. And the other thing that was raised as a sentiment is to do the opposite of what they want, to live the kind of the true way. So to use cash, insist on using cash. I've heard about people going in large groups to a supermarket that stopped using cash. They went in, filled their kind of trolleys and baskets, and all arrived at all the checkouts, and then said, no, I've got cash. I can pay. And the shop would, or the store would go, but we can't take cash. Not my problem. And then you walk out.
So that in France it was.
Yeah, it was France. And similar things elsewhere. People going into restaurants and food places and order the food and say, no, I've got legal tender. I'll pay you. Oh, but we can't. Well, you should be able to take legal tender. So your problem. So I don't know, more of living, eating real food, getting healthier and getting resilient. Because, you know, to fight this war, and God knows the last 3 years, I know, and many of you guys, you need to be healthy. You need to be mentally strong, neurologically healthy. You know, there's tough times coming, but I think we'll win in the end. But the awareness is growing. If people live and reject all the nonsense and convert people steadily and slowly using published data and science, and a lot of this content as well, it has the advantage that it's all published. I mean, no one can say any element of what I said is a conspiracy theory. You can say that I'm coming to the wrong conclusions from all of this material that's published, but only an idiot would come to a different conclusion. I mean, come on. So I think a lot of it is out there now. It's out in the open. There's growing awareness. And the take-up of the boosters in America is 2%. And I think that might include the ancient old people from nursing homes who are automatically given them. Things are changing. If they try and pull some kind of, they can't pull a pandemic nonsense now because people could say, hold on a minute. And monkeypox failed. They tried that. Tedros overruled the technical panel of the WHO. They voted 9 against 6 that it's not an emergency. And of course it wasn't. It was a joke. And Tedros overruled them, and they tried to make it stick. And a few months ago, they tried to get all the media in the world together, started talking about a new COVID variant. And everyone just turned around and laughed at them. And what are you talking about? And then it all went quiet. But they did try it. So they are failing now in multiple fronts. They've delayed some of their programs because of the challenges, and they've got a growing awareness around them, and they're very conscious of that. So I think it's all to play for. But yeah, spreading awareness, grassroots up, and don't do anything to support what they're pushing towards. Yeah. Can I go for 1 minute just while people are getting some questions? I just need to do one thing for 1 minute.
Definitely.
I need to put something in the oven. No dinner.
Okay, so in the meantime, I will just invite everybody who has questions to raise your hands, so we'll be able to manage it.
I have to be felt if I can.
Yeah, I know that. Harry had a question. Then you can move forward. So Harry, we'll be just waiting for Ivor to be back.
אוקיי. חברים, אני מזכיר לכם שבסוף ההרצאה אנחנו נפתח את השיחה לשיחה פתוחה בעברית, אז אתם מוזמנים להישאר ולקחת חלק.
אגב, אצלי לא מופיע אפשרות להרים את היד, לא יודע אם אצל החברים כן.
המיקרופון פתוח לכולם, הם פשוט צריכים לעשות את זה בחוכמה ורגישות כדי שלא ידברו כולם ביחד.
Okay. So you have meat in the oven?
Yeah. I got some food there, but I don't know. I think it's burnt. Yeah.
Okay,
anyway,
so
no
Harry.
Okay. It was an amazing presentation, Ivor. Thank you so much. It's funny, actually, when we speak about those subjects in Hebrew, it sounds so morbid, but with your incredible accent, it sounds almost amusing, and you can't get enough, really. But seriously, now I would like to ask a question. Since you're from Ireland, I would like to understand and to know more about the changes that you see there as we are dealing with this serious attack on every aspect of our lives, cultural, social, our tradition, our families, on the philosophy and economics of classical liberalism and the destruction of conservatism. And they do it through cultural Marxism, which you mentioned earlier, progressive leftists, mind, immigration, LGBT nonsense, radical feminism. So I would like to see and to understand from you, how do you see all of that consolidate in your society, and what kind of impact do you see in Ireland?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's cultural Marxism used just as a tool, and so many people fall for it because it sounds nice and they know that's what works with the people. Ireland's pretty bad. I mean, the majority of our teachers are embracing the transgender stuff in the schools as like teaching kids as early as 10 or 11 years old about transgender, and you can be other sexes and that's fine. Social contagion madness that they're teaching the kids. And a lot of the teachers, public servants, you know, they're not private industry, they're not cynical hardcore people like us. They're teachers and they've fallen for it. You even have women in their 60s who are traditional Irish values who are out in demonstrations to defend the trans education stuff against the people who are fighting it. So it is nuts. I mean, it's social contagion. The immigration, Ireland just cannot. We have a huge problem with homeless people. We have a problem with housing, but they just can't get enough immigrants in. They're just piling them in. Bus loads are coming in. People are taking phone videos. Like Ukraine, there were meant to be a load of Ukrainian people coming over, but our politicians were flying over to Ukraine during the war. But then people had to come here. That was the narrative. But then a whole lot of buses appeared at 5 a.m. after flights, but they weren't Ukrainian. They were actually black people. But they came in with all their luggage and mobile phones and were brought off in buses to various places all around the country. No one even knows, well, where are they coming from? So it's the policy from the top again, and the Pan-European Union in the 20s, and you saw one or two Pan-European Union people in the slides. They had a strategy that they documented that mass immigration into Europe would break down national sovereignty, culture, and national traditions, and would make the countries more amenable to get into a Pan-European Union, like a super state. So the irony is, if you question these policies of mass immigration that make no sense, you might get accused of being a racist. The irony is that the guys driving it at the top, they're the ultimate racist because they're nearly all white guys up the top, and they're treating people like cattle. They're actually taking people from all over the world and pushing them into other zones. I mean, that's a shockingly racist thing to do, to treat different races as like cattle and force them into different places to make society weaker. But that's what's happening. But the teachers and the useful idiots down at the ground level, of course, think they're all virtuous. So Ireland is bad. Ireland had the longest lockdowns in Europe. Ireland has a massive amount of trans nonsense that no media will criticize. Ireland has a massive immigration problem. And when anyone has a demonstration because they shove 500 people into a small community that was actually quite stable, and now it's just crazy the amount they're shoving in there. If people have a demonstration to question that, and they say, we're not worried, we have nothing against other races, but you are overloading our communities with people out of nowhere coming in here, the media will attack them as far-right racists. So anyone questioning government policy that makes no sense gets accused of being a far-right racist. And the Irish culturally are really not very brave when they're accused of something bad. They tend to get defensive and pull back. Not me, obviously, but that's what they're doing. Anyone who complains, they pour the heat onto them from the media. You know, it's tough, but the demonstrations are getting bigger. The Telegram groups are spreading. Recently, the hate speech law that the Irish government tried to bring in, it was insane. It breached the Constitution every second sentence. They wanted to bring in a law that 10 protected groups, including sexual identity stuff, if a single policeman gets the opinion that you may have hateful material in your possession, a single policeman can authorize coming to your house to look at your computers, laptops, and anything they want. This is what they wrote in the law. It passed through one house of the parliament, got stuck in the second because there was a public pushback. Elon Musk jumped in as well, and Trump, I think. But the writing of the legislation is just beyond frightening. It's thought crime. A policeman can come in. If you don't give a PIN number to a device, that is also a crime with 1 year's prison sentence. And if you have material, it's up to you to prove that you would never have shared that further. It's up to you to prove. So I could write down in a diary all kinds of thoughts that might be hateful towards whatever, some sexual group or something. Their law says if the policeman comes in and finds that diary, I am guilty until I prove I was never going to share that material. Like that's just insane. But they wrote the legislation like that and worse. And they were well on their way to getting it through, but there was a public backlash and they backed off. So it does work. If the public push back, they back off. They actually do.
Ivor, I would like to ask a question and then to make a small comment. I think something that I should bring to your attention. I just want to confirm, because your culture there is Catholic and very conservative, traditional. Is it true that now gay marriage and abortion is allowed in Ireland?
Yeah, the gay marriage was, it could have been 7-8 years ago at a guess. And the Irish were very European citizens, and the church has been completely destroyed. The church also did a lot of child abuse. You know, there was a lot of kind of young boys abused by priests.
They lie about the church.
Yeah, and Boston as well. Remember, there was a huge thing with the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So they've been attacking the church for decades because they know the church is kind of gives a cultural strength to the people. So it's been attacked for decades. And once the church got caught with that abuse that they hid, the church went down the toilet. So that's gone. So most people don't go to services anymore. They've lost that. And when gay marriage came along, it was sold so powerfully by the media. And to be honest, I don't care about gay marriage. I just never cared about that sex stuff until they started ramming it down my throat, if you pardon the pun. Mm-hmm. The problem is when they're ramming this ideology down, if people want to go off and do any sex stuff they want and even get married or whatever, I don't care. But when you start bringing it to the schools and the children and pushing it, that's the problem. And Ireland has rolled over largely on a lot of this stuff, and the people perceive this as progressive and equity and fair and virtuous, yeah. And they're falling for it largely.
Yeah, Ivor, because you're a hero of truth and you're doing an amazing job, I would like just to bring to your attention a gentleman that we interviewed here in our channel. His name is Christopher Fogarty. I probably pronounced his name really badly. He wrote a book called Ireland, 1845-1850, The Perfect Holocaust and Who Kept It Secret and Perfect. And he speaks about the so-called potato famine. And he is able to demonstrate with facts that millions of Irish were basically executed by the British, and it was a completely different narrative. So with your permission, I would like to send you the lecture, and maybe you want to look into that, because I think that you will be doing a great service to your people if you will, look into that, and maybe you will find out that something is really hidden and terrible. So
yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I'm quite familiar with the history of that, and it's not really denied. It's just people don't talk about it anymore, and it's seen as kind of awkward. The modern people, they don't want to talk about anything awkward. But yeah, I mean, Ireland's population is...
Ivor, the magnitude. He speaks about 5 to 6 million Irish who got murdered, who were murdered.
The population went from, I think it was around 8 million, and it dropped down maybe below 4. Some of those went on the coffin ships to America. They were so desperate, they went on ships that they actually called coffin ships because most of them died on the way over. But enormous death. There's mass graves all over Ireland. You can go and visit them.
He found them, and he was trying to raise statues, and they didn't let him. And he's speaking about like 126 British regiments that came there, seized the crops and seized, the livestock, and basically shipped it to England and Europe. And they, took all the food from the Irish people. So I just thought,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a shocking story, and it's acknowledged in history books broadly, but nowadays you see it's seen as politically incorrect to focus on it. And the British did. They shipped grain out from their plantations to Britain, and they shipped livestock, and the peasants were left mainly with potatoes. And when the potato blight came and it failed, the British just kept on shipping out all their food, and they just said, let them die. Just let them die. They're only savages anyway, right?
Yes.
That was it.
Thank you, Ivor. Azchut?
Yeah, we have Azchut Ladat, whose nickname is The Right to Know, and he wants to ask another question. So go on, please.
Hi. I'm sorry, I'm pretty much anonymous because I'm very provocative, so it's better like this. Okay? So I'm also a teacher, anti-vaxxer, and I don't want them to. I want to keep my profile low. Okay, I wanted to take advantage of the event and to ask you if you see the connection. You probably do, but the people don't, and I want them to know that connection between veganism. Not the fake food, but veganism and avoiding meat, if it is a part of the agenda, of course, and how they manipulate children from early age to be very sensitive and avoid meat and detached from nature and what is natural for us, like in the countryside. When we see chickens and the meat and slaughter, and in the buildings we see Bambi shot and crying. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a complicated topic in a way. The simplest to put it is vegan activism and the Seventh-day Adventists that have universities and hospitals all over America, and Harvey Kellogg. There's a stream where vegans are extremely motivated, even though they're a small percentage, extremely motivated to change the world and stop people eating animals. So there's a whole force there. Yeah. So there's a whole force there, and I covered this years ago. People in Australia who had researched the whole history of the anti-meat agenda. And it goes back 100 years before these other bad guys. However, these bad guys, of course, love it. It's a social contagion. It weakens humans, and it disconnects them from their genetic and evolutionary heritage. And people who eat less meat, on average, as a society, who eat very little meat, they will eat more fake food, more junk food, be more sick, be a better market for new pharmaceuticals, and they'll be a weaker society. So there's the vegans and the vegetarians who have gotten in positions of influence over the last 100 years, and large organizations who drove it ideologically. And there's also the kind of exploitation of that movement by the same characters we're talking about. Because for climate and societal weakness, pushing against meat is just an obvious thing to do. I mean, if I were them, I'd be doing it. It's just so obvious. Take away meat, let people eat crap, and then they'll be weaker and they'll be more unhealthy. And that's the society you want. Fat and sick societies with no culture, no connection to the land and nature, and with their head in the phone or watching the news all day. That's what you want. It's the perfect ant farm. It's so simple.
I have, of course, I know it. A disclaimer, I was like 15 years ago a very, how do you say, a pioneer in veganism in Israel. Okay? I have a massive Facebook page, like 30,000. It's big for Israel. Of course, it's censorized. Nothing is shown now after COVID. And after 7 years of veganism, I became like type 1 diabetic. Okay? I made like blood sugars of, how I don't know, say 500, 1,000, ketoacidosis, you know. And then I refused to take insulin because I don't trust doctors, and I made statistics on me and arrived to ketogenic and carnivore by myself. On my way, I also found you, and I admire your work. And I wanted also, thank you. And I also want to, and now I make counter activism, contra to veganism, and explain on the process that I made and what I learned in the process. People like 2 years ago, 1 year ago, laughed at me, said I was a conspiracy theorizer, but now they see that they tell you in the agenda that they want to avoid meat to save the planet, like the Pope and all the celebrities and all the stuff. And also the health department in Israel, they say it clear. If you don't eat meat, you also save the environment and the climate and also your health. And I have like a sensor. I will finish.
So true.
I invite you to my channel because I maybe want to also do an interview with you. Okay?
Super. Absolutely. And in case I miss it, because there's Signal, Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, but the guys like Pablo and Harry can connect through email. Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you.
Pablo.
Now I need my dinner soon, but I'll take 1 or 2 more.
Okay, so just if we have the time for a couple more questions, just guys, do it quick. Anybody?
I have much questions, but I need to breathe after the presentation.
אני תמיד מוכן.
I would like to ask a quick question. Do you happen to know if, how do you call that, homeschooling in Ireland is allowed?
It is allowed, and I know someone who did it for a year or 2 for the influential years for his child, and then he went back and let the school do it, and he said, if you fill out the paperwork carefully and you're clever and you don't raise any question around home life or any issues and you've got a good referee, he said the system actually works smoothly. And so far they're not trying to stop it, because I know they're trying to stop it in some countries. They're trying to squeeze it. They want everyone in the education system because that's where they indoctrinate the children. But in Ireland, it's still, you can do it, and there doesn't seem to be a push against it.
Very important. Now, we have to keep our children at home and not to indoctrinate them at school.
Yeah, I mean, we managed to do it without homeschooling. We talk to the kids a lot, and I'm involved for 10 years in controversial stuff, and they also saw me working 70 hours a week on major problems, and I'd have people, professionals from my corporate, at the house for dinner. They had a lot of exposure to what I did, and they knew it was different, and they knew I'm just not wrong. That sounds crazy, but they know generally. So when the food stuff came out, we converted them all to understand food. We did not force them to eat perfectly well. We allow exceptions, but we just always make them understand the road is to cancer, obesity, and diabetes. If you're going to do stuff, at least know what's bad and what's okay, and don't do the bad stuff too often, especially when you get older. When you're young, you can get away with a lot. So they had that history of seeing me on travel all over the world and lecture. They knew I knew all this stuff and the doctors didn't. And when COVID came, it was quite easy to just fully get them up to speed. So they went through COVID very easily because they knew it was nonsense. I told them, don't get in a fight about it. You know, there's no point you getting in a fight in school and your teacher going crazy because you're saying masks are nonsense. Do it if you want, but you don't need to do it. Adults are mainly fighting this war. But they all know how the world works. And I think that's the best thing you can do for your children. I mean, my wife worries about the future, potentially where we're heading, and the future for them. We have 5 children. And I said, don't worry, because they know how the chess games work. They can play the game. They can choose to be rebellious, be outside of the whatever, or they can choose to fight the system from within. Maybe they have a job in a bank, right? The center of the snake. But within that, they can influence people and they can, you know, I just think they just need to be empowered to know how the world works, to understand broadly, like what I went through there. Just not to be a useful idiot who just doesn't understand anything and believes propaganda. They can make their own choices how they want to live in this world.
I have a question, please.
Mm.
All the character that you manage in your election, did you see the they are connected to the Freemasons? All the guys.
Now, that's interesting. A few people I gave a talk like that in Dublin a few months ago in a club, great turnout, and also in Amsterdam and other places. And often people say, why didn't you mention the Rothschilds? Why didn't you mention the Wagners and the big banking families? And I said, simple. I'm going to do what Nordengaard does. Only mention what's fully documented. Because you'll never convert someone if you get caught talking about stuff that you can't prove. And there are many people and organizations behind the curtain where you only have rumors. Now, the Freemasons, I don't think personally the Freemasons have organized this. I think it's Rockefellers, and I think above them are the ultra-wealthy banking families going back hundreds of years. I won't say it because I can't prove it, but I assume that's the case. Even Rockefeller is not the top. But I think the Masons is a club where a lot of these people and these types of people will make sure they're members. So I'm guessing the Masons is full of globalist type people. But I don't think the Masons organization from hundreds of years ago has created this. I think it's a great club for them all to be in, maybe. That's my best guess.
Thanks.
Ivor, amazing. Totally thankful. I don't have on my conscience having you have a burnt dinner.
Well, just as a final point on health, for the last year or so, I do OMAD, 1 meal a day. Now, it's a very big meal, so I didn't get all slim and ripped, but I just think it's a great system that you work all day long with just coffees. You never have to stop to make a meal or breakfast. It's very productive, and in the evening, you really enjoy that meal. You savor it, and it's generally real food. And especially for men, once you get used to it, you don't think about food all day long. Most days. It's super. So I have not eaten anything since yesterday. It's now 10 p.m. Usually I eat around 6. But no problem. And women, usually females, probably due to evolution and having a different role in evolution, a couple of meals a day is better. A lot of women find it not so good, but a lot of men, it's ancestral, man.
Exactly. I'm a nomad carnivore, 500 to 700 grams a day, and that's enough. I mean, you don't need anything beyond that. So
before you escape us, just a small question on a personal note. First, if you ever want to come to Israel, not now, okay? But if you want to come to Israel, we will be delighted to host you and to buy you dinners, multi-dinners for your burned offering, and to enjoy your amazing companionship. But just a quick question: if someone wants to start the ketogenic diet, would you recommend him to go into regular eating, mostly fat and meat, or to start fasting or intermittent? If you can just say 2 sentences about it.
Right. I absolutely can. Sorry, was that Harry?
Yes.
Yes. Myself and Dr. Gerber in my book, our book, Eat Rich, Live Long, we're very clear on that. The general recommendation for health is a healthy, low-carb, high-fat, real foods diet. And if you want to go more towards keto, the best way is by skipping meals and doing fasting, which is also healthy. And that'll put you into the keto spectrum. But generally, low-carb, healthy fats diet, and then skip meals to add fasting. And it'll also simultaneously put you into ketosis, which is very healthy. We were not sure about recommending outside of like a kind of a medical intervention of just sticking to hard keto all the time, chasing ketones. And we also don't agree with shoving in fat and butter to try and force ketones like they're magic sauce. So low carb, healthy fats, skip meals regularly, do something like OMAD, go through long periods of 6 or 8 hours of ketosis each day, go out of ketosis, go back in, and just try and have it as ancestral as possible.
Thank you very much, and God bless you for everything.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very
love
much,
Israel, love the people. Myself and the wife, we just had such a blast for 4 days in 19 in Tel Aviv. And really sorry for the recent horrifying stuff that's going on. I mean, what can I say? But yeah, love the place, love the people.
Just for the record, everybody. Oh, go on, Jordan.
No, sorry, Pablo, talk.
Okay, I just wanted to have it on the record that all of the amazing work that Ivor does is available on YouTube, on The Fat Emperor, and on his site as well, The Fat Emperor. And we'll be glad to host you again, hopefully in the near future. I know we'll love your talk, as usual. And Doron, some final words before
don't forget to support his work, please. It's very important.
Definitely. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And if you Google Ivor Cummins, actually, the search engine, you'll kind of hit my YouTube, my Twitter, and the main things. I'm not censored on Google search yet. It appears, which is great. Oh, and one last thing. If you go to www.covidchroniclesmovie.com, all one word, you won't find it in Google, and it's censored on YouTube. But you can download our movie we made. And it's interesting to watch now. It's aged like fine wine. So, boom.
Lovely.
Good luck, guys. Thanks so much. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.
ביי.
מישהו ניסה לדבר ושמעו אותו ממש מקוטע. עכשיו...
It was
לא, דנה הייתה מיקרופון פתוח בטעות.